Going to talk now to our international affairs commentator, Doug Herbert, who joins us on the programme. Doug, we're also getting reports just in the last few moments, in fact, of hooded soldiers appearing on national television. I mean, the tensions here in Burkina Faso have been building for quite some considerable time, and it's very unclear still, though, exactly who may be in charge in the country, isn't it?
It is unclear, Stuart. What isn't unclear, though, is that none of this really comes as a giant surprise. Literally for months, if almost not for years, there have been expectations of this type of scenario potentially playing out in Burkina Faso. Let's not forget, this comes in a region with, coups in recent months in Mali, in Chad, in Sudan, and in Guinea, and the UN, United Nations envoy to West Africa, actually warned recently that Burkina Faso might be next in the line for a potential coup d'état. Look. Public anger, that is anger among ordinary Burkina Faso residents, has been mounting very steadily, not just this year, but really since 2015 in the wake of the collapse of the former government, the overthrow of the former President Blasé. And what you've had basically in this case is this anger over what the public sees as the government's signal failure to stem the jihadist violence, the Islamist militant violence, to give the army basically the resources it says it desperately needs in order to see off this jihadist threat. The government's failure here, that is what the anger is really directed at. And that is in large part what is seen as spurring all of these protests. And it's not just the protests we've seen in recent days. We have seen tons of protests in the past few months. Back in late November, there was a very bloody and big incident where, dozens were wounded, hundreds of people turned out. In recent months, we've seen dozens of people killed at various protests, mostly in the north of the country. But this type of instability and the resulting public anger has really been concentrated in broad swathes, Stuart, of the north, of the west, of the east of Burkina Faso, areas in which the government is seen as having no authority, in which the army is basically seen as being left high and dry, left in the lurch, badly equipped, poorly trained forces who sometimes are running out of food and basic supplies and ammunition as jihadists sort of surround them on all sides, leaving a lot of them with no choice but to flee. So once again, the public anger in this case is not directed at the army. The sympathies lie with the army. And in fact, many ordinary people in Burkina Faso would welcome an army takeover. That is an overthrow of a government that they see as absolutely having failed in its primary mission of protecting ordinary people from this rising militant threat. So that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing growing clashes also between protesters in many cases and security forces. So it's not just a situation of instability, but it's sort of like a pressure cooker that's finally exploding.
And Doug, is this just an internal issue, or is this an issue which is affecting and worrying indeed the whole of the West African and Sahel region?
It's the entire region. Look, Burkina Faso happens to be sort of at the epicenter of this fight. But let's not forget that, the French troops, which have now been winding down their presence in the Sahel region, but there, have been over 5,000 of them, most of them based in Mali and neighboring Mali to this point. And we hear a lot of reports there. A French soldier was killed in this mission in Mali just over the weekend. We hear sometimes less about Burkina Faso. There are fewer sort of Western soldiers there, but the threat in Burkina Faso, in Chad, in Niger, in Mauritania, all across this very arid strip of desert just south of the Sahara, really, this whole region deeply impoverished, with a lot of security problems and very few police in what is a really very sparsely populated area in many respects. It has led to fears among a lot of people in the region and beyond that it is fertile ground for jihadists who have been displaced, uprooted in many cases from their prior base in the Mideast. They now see this region as perhaps a very welcoming, fertile place to base themselves, to launch attacks throughout that region. But the fear being down the road, if they get more ambitious, also elsewhere here in Europe. It's a transit hub right now for migrants, people fleeing that region, making their way northward to northern Africa, and eventually they try to make it on those treacherous journeys to Europe. And inevitably, it also becomes a transit hub, Stuart, for illegal weapons, for jihadists, for people trafficking. It's all in there. So an equation for worse to come is really in the offing. And Burkina Faso is just really like a microcosm, a tiny piece in a much broader puzzle of anxiety and concern for the region and beyond.
Doug, thanks very much. Doug Herbert, international affairs commentator. Just to repeat that news once again, if you're just tuning into us, the president of Burkina Faso detained at a military camp by mutinying soldiers there.